Namaste, good morning, and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Sunday morning service. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Mritam Gamaya Aviravirmaedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tena Mam Pahi Nityam Tena Mam Pahi Nityam. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourself, O Lord, and protect us evermore from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. Om Vishnurva Tripurantako Bhavatu Va Brahma Surendrotha Bhanurva Shashalakshanota Bhagavan Buddhota Siddhota Vaya Ragadvesha Visharti Moharahita Sattvanukampodyato Yasarvai Sahasamskrito Gunaganais Tasmai Namah Sarvada. The Supreme Reality and its messengers are known by various names in various traditions. But as for me, I offer my worship always to the one going by any name and belonging to any tradition that is free from attachment and hatred, free from worldliness and delusion, who is filled with compassion towards all living beings and is possessed of all noble virtues. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om Peace, Peace, Peace be unto us all. So this morning's talk is on a Vedantic view of Jesus. And there are a few prayers that I usually open the service with. I alternate among them, sometimes according to the subject, sometimes just because of there's no tie to the subject, but just feels appropriate somehow for the moment. Today, the two prayers I said, which I do use from sometimes to open talks, are especially appropriate to the topic today, because the first prayer, a very famous traditional prayer from the Upanishads, lead us from the first part is from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and the second part from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. But they're traditionally put together as one prayer, the Rudra prayer. So lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. So Jesus was one of those children of light who came to do that, to lead us from the unreal to the real, to show us the path from the unreal to the real, the path from darkness to light, and the path from death to immortality. And then the rest of the prayer, reach us through and through ourself, O Lord, and protect us evermore by thy sweet, compassionate face. And so the face of Jesus was one of those sweet, compassionate faces of God. And then the second part, of course, which is not a prayer, but a statement and affirmation, which says, the Supreme Reality and its messengers are known by various names in various traditions. In the actual prayer, different names are mentioned, including Buddha and Mahavira, the Jina. But the Supreme Reality and its messengers are known by various names in various traditions. But as for me, I offer my worship always to the one going by any name and of any tradition that is free from attachment and hatred, free from worldliness and delusion, and who is possessed of all noble virtues. So that states very succinctly and very beautifully the Hindu approach to spirituality. Even within Hinduism, the natural human tendency towards clannishness and narrowness and parochialism, etc., has raised its head occasionally, but it could never establish itself fully in India because of this dominant trend from the time of the Vedas to the present day, the dominant trend of liberality. So even though the followers of some sects might say that our sect is the best or the highest or the real sect of Hinduism, that couldn't get far. It could have dominance within their sect alone, but it couldn't spread because of this dominant trend in Hinduism of liberality. The idea that wherever spirituality is seen, I bow my head in recognition of that. And as long as the Hindu tradition stays true to that in the main, then the Hindu tradition will certainly live. So I chose this topic, a Vedantic view of Jesus, because of the season, obviously. Christmas is coming. Normally, I would speak on this subject closer to Christmas, not at the beginning of December, but this is the only Sunday talk I'm giving this month, because next Sunday I will be giving a retreat, online retreat, on the Advaita Makaranda, through another organization, an organization connected by sympathy to the Ramakrishna Mission, run by devotees of the Ramakrishna Mission, but not run by one of our centers officially. So next Sunday I won't be able to give the talk here because of that. And the following Sunday would be the 19th of December, which is so close to Christmas that we'd hardly have attendance anyway. Even on a day like this, which is far from Christmas, we hardly have people here. There's certainly more people that are watching online, though I don't know how many, but December and January are often at our centers nowadays. It didn't used to be this way, but nowadays December and January are very poorly attended months. And so there's not much sense in having lectures the rest of December if I can't give one next week. So this is the only talk this month on a Sunday, and we'll continue the classes for a couple of weeks, but the only Sunday talk. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to speak about Jesus. In our early work in America, and early work means from the time of Swami Vivekananda in 1893 until the end of the 60s and the actually into the 70s. Almost all of the people who came to our center were either from a Christian or a Jewish background. And so at that time in our work, there was much more reference to the Bible, to Jesus, and much more many times the talks would reference things that the audience of the time could easily relate to. After the liberalization of the immigration laws, when large numbers of people came from India, the demographics of our centers changed radically, and then the Swamis coming to this country also were of a different generation. They had not been, thankfully, had not been brought up under the British Empire, which was a good thing. And as a result of that, they had not had a British education, and the acquaintance that was forced on them of the Bible. But again, that has changed the nature of our presentation of Vedanta. If you look at some of the books by the old Swamis, the Swamis who lived up into the 60s and 70s, you find Swami Prabhavananda's Sermon on the Mount According to Vedanta, still a very beautiful book, but it was geared towards and of course it can enrich anyone because it's a beautiful book that deals with universal truths, but it was geared towards a Christian audience. Or a Western audience, including the Jewish audience that was familiar with Christianity. Swami Akhilananda's A Hindu View of Christ, a beautiful study of Jesus from the Hindu viewpoint, and a full-size book. And there were all of Swami Paramananda's books were written for a Western audience and had a touch of Christian sensibility. They were Vedantic, and they were clearly Vedantic, but they had a touch of Christian sensibility because those were the people that he was teaching. Swami Atmarupananda has a small book called Why the Hindu Accepts Christ but Rejects Churchianity. It's a very catchy title and a wonderful title, Why the Hindu Accepts Christ but Rejects Churchianity. That means all of the things that came after Christ, the organization and the dogma and all of that which came after Christ. And that hasn't stopped completely. There's a beautiful book which I am sorry to say I haven't read. Sorry to say not because I'm ashamed of it, but sorry to say because I've missed reading it. A book by a German devotee, longtime German devotee, Hans Torvesten, called Ramakrishna and Christ, The Paradox of the Incarnation. It's supposed to be a very, very good book, and it compares Ramakrishna and Christ from various points of view, talking about the paradox of the incarnation. Swami Suhitanandaji, who's now a vice president of the order, but when he was general secretary, while I was living in India, the last long period of my life in India a few years ago, before coming to Houston, he asked me to write a biography of Jesus. He said that we have biographies of Rama and Krishna, and we're working on a biography of Muhammad that was written by Swami Saradeshananda, and working on the life of Buddha, but we would like for the order to publish a life of Jesus. So I actually started it. I haven't gotten far. It's one of many writing projects that I are still in the initial stages on my computer. But the fact that he wanted someone to write a life of Jesus still shows the pertinence of the life of Jesus to our Vedantic work. From Swamiji's time, again, the connection with Christianity in our work in the West was very close. There were some Christian ministers who were very friendly to Swamiji, usually Unitarian and Congregational, the more liberal denominations. Later, there were a number of, in the later generations of Swamis that came, there were a number of Christian ministers and Jewish rabbis who took an interest in Vedanta, who actually became a member of our Vedanta societies. And this communication with Christianity in our Vedanta societies, it sometimes caused hurt feelings among our many Jewish devotees because of their fraught history with Christianity. But the reason for it was natural. The emphasis on Christianity was natural. That is, Judaism was seen as an ethnic religion which you were born into. Conversion even now is rare in Judaism, though some rabbis will convert those who seek it, but no one in the Jewish community goes out and tries to get converts. It was never and is not a missionary religion. And so it was seen as an ethnic religion for the Jewish people. Whereas Christianity from its early days was a missionary religion, and which spread around the world and which did convert people. And so it was natural that our Swamis would look for a communication with Christianity more than with Judaism, because Christianity, again, was seen as saw itself as a world religion. But there are many interesting parallels between Hinduism and Judaism as well. In fact, there's a beautiful, very scholarly, large, that size, large book called The Veda and the Torah. The Torah being the five first books of the Jewish Bible. And so there's certainly interesting work to be done there in a comparison between Judaism and Hinduism. And in our societies in the West, there have been an outsized number of Jews who were members of our societies because of the general liberality of the Jewish community, religious liberality. So during my 52 years, in fact, my 52nd year was 2 days ago, the 3rd of December, when I first came to Chicago. During my 52 years, I saw in the early years that there were a number of Christian ministers, Catholic priests, Catholic nuns, and Jewish rabbis who were actual members of our Vedanta society. In San Diego, we even had a Southern Baptist minister. I say even Southern Baptist minister because they are evangelical and very conservative. But he became a member of our Vedanta society in San Diego. So, and of course, as you all know, we celebrate Christmas in our centers, not just outside of India, but in India itself, we celebrate Christmas. And so, again, the conversation with Christianity may not be as active now as it once was, but I think it will once again become more active in time. So now let me address the question, why would one put forward a Vedantic view of Jesus? And Jesus was born in the Middle East, in what is now Israel and Palestine. And from a Jewish family, he himself was Jewish. His followers were mostly Jewish, almost all Jewish. And then his religion came eventually to the West. It stayed in the Middle East and came to Europe and then spread around the world from there. But why would one assume that one could give a Vedantic view of Jesus? Because Jesus belongs to the Christians, so not to us. Well, of course, we would say that no, Jesus doesn't belong to the Christians. Jesus was a great son of God, a great child of light, who came to teach spirituality, and his teachings are universal. Secondly, the great and famous Christian monk of the 20th century, Thomas Merton, he wrote in one of his books, I don't know if it was New Seeds of Contemplation or where, I read it many, many years ago, 40, 50, I read it 50 years ago. He said that what would have happened had Christ's life and messages gone to the East instead of towards the Roman Empire. He just raises the question, but implies in the question that Christianity that would have developed would have been very different. It went to the Roman Empire, where it was influenced by the Roman, the Greek, the Jewish streams of thought, and eventually the European streams of thought. But what would have happened if the same life and teachings had spread, say, to India or to China? Very different cultures, where that life and those teachings would have been interpreted very differently, where the tradition would have been spread and communicated very differently from what it was, from what happened in the Middle East. And so it's a very pregnant question and a very rich question, because we have Jesus, the phenomenon, the great teacher, the great child of light, and his teachings. And then we have 2,000 years of interpretation, 2,000 years of commentary, 2,000 years of people trying to understand him from their own cultural and intellectual context. Great teachers of the world, the greatest teachers of the world, they don't interpret their own lives. They don't write bhashyas or commentaries. They come and lead their life and give their teachings in simple terms that ordinary people can understand. And then it's left to later generations to interpret the meaning, to try to draw philosophical implications and theological principles and so forth and cultural practices out of their teachings. So Swami Vivekananda said even about Sriramakrishna that he was just content to lead that great life, but I saw the meaning. Swamiji says that Sriramakrishna didn't even understand himself the full meaning of his own life. That was left to me, to Swami Vivekananda. That's why Sri Ramakrishna brought Swami Vivekananda, because Sri Ramakrishna was, again, content to lead that great life, as Swamiji said, and leave it to others to interpret its greatness. Sriramakrishna, when Hriday, his nephew, brought a young calf by tether to Dakshineshwar, and Sriramakrishna said, Hriday, what are you doing with that calf? And he said, oh, I'm going to take it home to my village, and there I'm going to fatten it up, raise it, and then when it's big, I'm going to sell it and make a lot of money. And then Sri Ramakrishna said, oh my goodness, so much calculation, and he fell over. So Sri Ramakrishna didn't spend his time interpreting things. He led his life, generated that tremendous spiritual power, and left his life and his teachings for the world. So you find that their emphasis is on leading their life, generating spiritual power, and transforming the people around them, and leaving that power for future generations. And again, it was, in the case of Sri Ramakrishna, it was Swami Vivekananda's purpose to channel that power, to give it direction. So the later interpretation of Jesus's life and teachings, that went through several layers of cultural interpretation. First of all, there was they were the disciples themselves, who were all from a Jewish background, and who were Jews, and not just from a Jewish background, but they were Jewish. And they saw Jesus as a Jewish teacher. And then you find St. Paul coming. St. Paul came, who was Jewish himself, and had been an oppressor of the early Christians, but then he had a vision on his way to Damascus, which completely transformed him, and he became the great apostle of Jesus. He never saw Jesus, but he was a great apostle, follower of who came to the tradition and to the reality, the spiritual reality of Jesus after that vision on the way to Damascus. And so the cultural influences that were there in the beginning were, first of all, the Jewish cultural influences, and then there were the Greek. Greek philosophy was still, through the Roman Empire, which had conquered that part of the world, Greek philosophy was still the major philosophical trend in the world of that area at that time. And then there was the Roman Empire. So you find the Jewish, the Greek philosophical tradition, and the Roman Empire, the influence of those. You find, again, speaking of the difference between the life of a great teacher and the interpretation, you find with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who's considered in India an incarnation of God, whom Sri Ramakrishna himself considered an incarnation of God. He had no Vivekananda to interpret his teachings. And so you find that with the great and beautiful life, extraordinary life of Sri Chaitanya, that it devolved into a rather narrow sect. They're very good people, sincere people. I've known many of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, very religious, very religiously minded, some of them very spiritual. But as far as it goes, it remained a narrow sect. Through ISKCON, Krishna consciousness, it has had, for the first time, some appeal to parts of the rest of the world. But in general, it remained a small sect, and very sectarian in its nature. And that, I think, is because Sri Chaitanya didn't bring someone like Swami Vivekananda with him to interpret. Sri Ramakrishna said from his own inner experience that Sri Chaitanya had the inner experience of Advaita, non-dualism, but outwardly he taught devotion. He said it was like the two sets of teeth of the elephant. The elephant has the large tusks for dealing with the outside, but it has the inner set of teeth for chewing and for masticating its food. And so Sri Chaitanya had the outer tusks of dualism for the public, but he had the inner experience of Advaita. But that, of course, in the absence of someone to interpret like Swami Vivekananda, that aspect of Sri Chaitanya's life was completely lost. So, and that is denied by his followers. What Swami Vivekananda was most afraid of And what he fought to preserve was Sri Ramakrishna's universality and the fact that Sri Ramakrishna came for the welfare of all, not even just for spiritual people, but for everyone. So as Swamiji said, he was always afraid that the followers of Sri Ramakrishna would take him and make another small sect, like the Vaishnavas, make a small, narrow sect out of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. And he was afraid that they would take his life and teachings and the power that he had brought and lock it up in temples. That's why Swamiji fought so hard with the early disciples, not to overemphasize temple worship. And he said, don't make a Thakur body out of this tradition. That is, don't make a temple where people come and give donations to have you do arati to their new car or their new motorcycle and do all kinds of blessings for money and things like that. No, he didn't want that at all. He said that the power Sri Ramakrishna generated was meant for all. It shouldn't be locked up in a temple. So in the early decades of the Ramakrishna mission, up until very recent times, a few decades ago, it was difficult in the mission to get permission from the authorities to start a temple because of that idea. Everyone had a shrine room and had simple worship, but starting a big temple where there was a daily bhog and all of that, that was very difficult to get permission. That's changed for better or for worse, but that was the earlier tradition. So Swami Vivekananda, his fears were justified because of the tendencies among human beings. And so we can imagine without Swami Vivekananda, if he had not come, what would have happened to Sri Ramakrishna's teachings? What would we know of Sri Ramakrishna? Even eventually his message would have gotten out, but in what form it would have come out. When Swamiji came back from America to India, people asked him, why didn't you teach Sri Ramakrishna? Why didn't you teach the great incarnation who has come? So Swamiji said, no, that's been the great harm done by religions, that they put the teacher first rather than the principles. And people forget the principles and remember only the teacher. Then they start fighting over whose teacher is greater. So I taught the principles, and in time people will ask, was there anyone who embodied these principles? And then they will find Sri Ramakrishna, but as an embodiment of principles, not because he's our incarnation and everyone has to believe him. So just imagine, had Swamiji not come, if you see the tendencies among the other followers, what would have happened to the message of Sri Ramakrishna? So again, we have the great teacher who leads the life and then the interpretation. So every great teacher teaches universal truths, but then applies them to the needs of the time. And so that's what Jesus did. He came at a certain point in history where he taught universal truths, but he taught them in a way that was meant for a certain people in a certain place. That is, and in a certain historical context. And so we find that in time there are the overlays on the message of Jesus. So it's very helpful to read just the actions of Jesus and just his words and try to extract those from the layers of interpretation. As far as the Jewish layer of interpretation, of course, Jesus was a Jew. And his followers were Jews. His family was Jewish. And therefore, the influence of Judaism is profound in Christianity, which is obvious. And the early disciples thought, again, as I said before, that Jesus's message was a Jewish message meant for the Jewish people. It was St. Paul who saw that, no, this is a universal message which is meant for everyone, Jew and Gentile both. It should not be restricted to the Jews. And he fought hard with the early followers of Jesus to open it up and to expand it, to make it accessible to everyone. So again, the influence of Judaism was profound, but there were certain influences which had a negative influence on Christianity and on later Islam, which also came out of the same soil and tradition. And that is, in Judaism, there was the idea that our God, the God of the Jews, is the true God. The God of the Babylonians and the Egyptians and other people, those are false gods. Our God is the true God. Judaism was never a missionary religion. It was a tribal religion and still is, basically. And so that idea that our God is the true God, that did no harm. But when it came into missionary religions like Christianity and Islam, where they taught that our God is the true God and everyone is in the whole world should worship our God, then it became terribly destructive. So that was one of the early influences that came into Christianity, which has continued to do tremendous harm in the world, that destructive tendency. So again, St. Paul universalized Christianity and up to a certain extent, according to his own light and realization. He was a great saint, St. Paul. He was a great saint of high spiritual experience, but he added more layers of interpretation. Some of it very good, some of it very beautiful, and some of it understandable, but which over generations had bad effects. Now that happens in all traditions. Swami Vivekananda said that we have to be very careful now, meaning he and his brother disciples and the first disciples of the direct disciples. We have to be very careful now, because any mistake that we make now will be multiplied over generations and come to do great harm in society. So he was aware of that danger. And so with St. Paul, he had the experience of the glory of the soul, and it must have happened in the vision he had on his way from Damascus, which was that which transformed his life completely. The Saul who came before and Paul who came after, the same person who changed his name to Paul. It was like he was going west, and then suddenly after that experience, he's going east. Everything in his life was changed after that. But he saw the glory of the soul. But he saw also that people don't recognize the glory of the soul. It's clouded, it's stained. So he wondered, where did the stain on the soul come from? And so he looked to the story of Adam and Eve and the fall of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, through taking the apple, the forbidden fruit, and eating it, disobeying God. And so he thought that must be where original sin and the original mistake which stains the soul came into life. If the soul is created by God, as he realized, and the soul is pure and perfect by nature, but it's stained, where did that stain come from? It must have come from the fall of Adam and Eve and has been transferred from generation to generation on down to the present day. And Jesus came to remove that stain of original sin. In Jesus' teaching, there is no original sin. He talks of sin, but not of original sin. But St. Paul is the one who, because of his mystical experience, and with good reason, he interpreted that. But again, that's an example of a truth which over time had bad effects. That emphasis on sin, the emphasis on the sinful nature of human beings. I once was listening to an evangelical radio preacher when I was living in San Diego, when I was driving in the car. A preacher who was in Pasadena, California. And so he said, I still remember, I can even hear his voice and accent. He said that people say that children are innocent. Oh, look at those innocent little children. They're not innocent. They're just immature sinners. They just haven't grown up enough to start sinning yet. And so the inability even to enjoy the innocence of children was quite amazing. That even children, you have to look on them, they're just sinners. They're just waiting to get old enough so they can start sinning. And so, yes, even that we can understand from a Vedantic standpoint, that they have some scars which haven't yet surfaced, and some scars that will lead them to make bad choices and so forth. But again, when the emphasis is on sin, and that your nature is sinful because of that original fall of Adam and Eve. And that fall of Adam and Eve came because of their pride and disobedience. God told them, don't eat from the fruit of this tree. And they did eat it. So they were filled with pride because the serpent on the tree told them that God doesn't want you to eat this fruit because he doesn't want you to be as smart as he is. That's a paraphrase, but the general idea. So they ate the fruit. So first pride came into them. We want to be as smart as God is. And then they disobeyed God. So those two things, pride and disobedience, are the source of original sin. And so therefore disobedience became extremely important, and pride became the great sin also. And so if you understand that, then you understand many things that happened later in Western civilization. Not that there was an absence of pride, but that pride was seen as the source of original sin. And you find in Christian monasticism and in Christian organization, disobedience was the great sin. And so an emphasis was put on obedience to the church is the way out of sin, and so forth. So, and also in St. Paul, there was, perhaps because probably it had to be, I shouldn't say probably, it had to have been because of his background, there was a trace of fanaticism as well. And so all of these things multiplied generation after generation. And then there was a Greek philosophical thought, which generally was beneficial because it gave a broader context for understanding Jesus. In fact, the first lines of the Gospel of St. John, which Swami Vivekananda said were the essence of the Christian philosophy. That in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and it continues beautifully for several verses. That came through the influence of Greek thought. And so Greek thought was generally helpful, but from somewhere, whether it was from the Greek tradition or what, there came this idea that theology, the role of theology, is to think about Scripture and to think about Jesus and his sayings, and rationally to understand them. No, the idea of philosophy in India is that through spiritual practice, you perfect the mind until you have comprehensive experience. You've seen reality, and you know the truth for sure. Then you philosophize to express that which you've experienced. But you find that early in Christianity, theology became thinking about. There were some who fought against that, like I'm not going to come up with his name now. He was an early theologian. He said that a theologian must be a man of deep prayer. Man, because it was only men who were allowed to be theologians at that time. So he said that a theologian must be a man of deep prayer, not just an intellectual. And so that's the Vedantic idea, that a theologian, a philosopher must be one who has deeper perception. And so, but from somewhere came this idea that theology comes out of just thinking with the ordinary mind, the educated mind, intellectually trained mind, but that's all. So you find that the mystics in Christianity were seen as sort of outliers, not so much in Eastern Orthodoxy, where they were more highly venerated even during their lifetimes, but in the Western Church, the theologians were the ones who were, intellectual theologians were the ones left to interpret the tradition, not deep experience. And then in the Roman Empire, you find that also, there are many more things, I won't take time now to say more, but many more things about the layers of interpretation that came on the wonderful life of Jesus, which explains how it is that Vedanta might be able to throw a new light on the life and teachings of Jesus, because there were many things that developed in the Christian tradition which are wonderful and beautiful and that we can learn from as well. But there are many other things that we would see as distortions of the life and teachings of Jesus. So instead of going on with the Romans and the others and what their layers of interpretation have done, let me come to the Vedantic view of Jesus and say a few words about that. So first of all, there's the idea of the incarnation. Hinduism and Christianity are the two religions that have the idea of the incarnation of God, and Buddhism has a modified view of the same. Buddha and the mythological Buddhas, the historical Buddha plus the mythological Buddhas and bodhisattvas, those serve the same place in Buddhism that the incarnation serves in Christianity and Hinduism. Only the Buddha, the origin of the Buddha is interpreted differently from the incarnational traditions. So from a Hindu standpoint, we have no difficulty understanding Jesus as an incarnation of God, not just as a great teacher who was a jivan mukta, a liberated soul through his own self-effort, or through the help of teachers or whatever he had, which we don't know, but he was an incarnation of God. It's easy for a Hindu to accept that and to see that. And that's what confounded Christian missionaries going to India, because they found that the Hindus had no trouble accepting Jesus, but they saw no reason to become Christians. The missionaries at first were delighted that the Hindus were so receptive to Jesus, but when they tried to make them give up their own gods and incarnations, they said, well, why should we do that? We'll worship Jesus also, because they had a ready context in which to accept Jesus as he was, as he taught and as he was. What they were rejecting was what Swami Atmarupananda called churchianity, a very beautiful term he coined, why the Hindu accepts Christ but rejects churchianity. So it was the churchianity that the Hindus rejected while taking Christ. And so even now you find in some remote parts of India, you sometimes find a house may have a shrine with different deities and incarnations, and there may be a picture of Jesus there also. It's quite common in India. Because of the basic liberality of Hinduism, the recognition that spirituality is what is important, and the only thing that really matters in religion. And so that made the Hindu receptive to spirituality wherever it might be seen. So the incarnation was not a problem. The only thing is that the Hindu view of the incarnation is different. The Christian view is that Christ was a unique incarnation, the one and only Son of God. And there's a reason for that. It's because of the context of interpretation into which Jesus was put. Once the role of original sin was seen early from the time of St. Paul, and then there were the other ideas current in the world of the Middle East at that time. Christ was put into a cosmological framework where there was the fall of humanity from the Garden of Eden through Adam and Eve. And then there was a long succession of prophets until you come to Jesus, who came to save humanity. In the Christian cosmology, there's no need for another incarnation, because Jesus came as the only begotten Son of God, who was born because human beings at the Garden of Eden, in the form of Adam and Eve, had been disobedient and full of pride and had let sin enter into a perfect world. And so because of the Jewish temple religion of that time, and again, this is no reflection on Judaism, but that was the model that was present at the time, where the sacrificial lamb, the lamb was sacrificed for the sins of one's fathers. And so Jesus was the sacrificial lamb that God himself sacrificed to himself for the forgiveness of the sins of humanity. And so I won't go into the whole story, but it all fits into a pattern where there was the fall of humanity. Jesus comes to restore the connection between God and humanity. And then if you believe in Jesus, you go back to God. And so where's the need for another incarnation? Because the way that they saw the purpose of the incarnation. But the Hindu sees that the incarnation's purpose is not that. Yes, the incarnation suffers for the welfare of humanity. Sriramakrishna himself suffered for the welfare of humanity. His cancer of the throat was his own crucifixion. But the idea is that the incarnation comes in order to reveal the nature of God. That yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya taratmanam surjamyaham. That whenever from time to time in the course of history there is the decline of religion, of spirituality, and the rise of adharma, unrighteousness, then I body myself forth. God takes birth. And so that happens again and again through history at long intervals, not every 5 years, but at long intervals, it happens. And so the incarnation comes to reveal the nature of God, to make the grace of God tangible and accessible, easily accessible to people, and to make the eternal truths of religion, make them accessible to the people of the time by living a life within a particular historical context, which again shows the application of those truths to the particular historical context. And so another difference is that in Christianity, Jesus was seen as unique, not just as the only incarnation, but it's only in Jesus that you find God's nature and human nature combined. Humans are not God. They're creature. God is God. Humans and other creatures are all creatures, completely distinct from God. Jesus alone unites God's nature and human nature. But the Vedantic view, as Sriramakrishna makes clear, and as the Gita makes clear, is that we all are divine by nature, but we've forgotten it. We've forgotten it. And so the incarnation comes to remind us that, like me, you also are the same truth. So Jesus said, I and my Father are one. That's taken as an exclusive statement that I alone and my Father are one, and you're not. But Jesus' statements can all be interpreted differently from the way they have become interpreted. And so Swami Vivekananda said that that was a statement of Advaita, of non-dualism. I and my Father are one, and because I have taken human form, what is true of me is true of you as well. That would be the Vedantic interpretation. So the incarnation, the view of the incarnation in a religious system like Hinduism, where there has been the incarnation from time to time through history, it gives a larger context and a deeper understanding of the incarnation, just because it's not a unique occurrence there. It's something that has happened from age to age. Another thing about Jesus that the Vedantic interpretation helps with is just the way of life of Jesus. It's immediately recognizable to the Vedantic or the Hindu mind because Jesus was the example of the sannyasi. He was the ideal sannyasi. He was a teacher who wandered through towns and the countryside barefoot, going from place to place, teaching those who would hear. Like the sannyasis, the traditional sannyasis would wander from village to village and town to town, sit under a tree, and whoever would come to hear them, then they would teach, and then they would move on. And so the image of Jesus as the teacher who wanders through the dusty paths of Palestine, teaching from place to place, coming to the village well and asking for a drink of water, as would happen in India as well, teaching all who would hear. So Jesus said, who hath ears to hear, let him hear. So that is the spirit of the sannyasi. Jesus didn't go around beating people over the head. Have you found your personal savior in me? If you don't, then I'm going to beat my name into you. No. Said, who has ears to hear, let him hear. So it goes from place to place teaching. And he says, cast not your pearls before swine. He realized that there's no use in teaching spirituality to those who don't want it. And so the later Christian effort to try to beat Christianity into sinners, to make them believe and to say that they believe, that Jesus didn't promote that. He said, cast not your pearls before swine, because they won't understand it. What does a pig understand of pearls? They don't. If it can't be eaten, then it's of no use. And so you teach those who are ready to hear, those who have the ears to hear. And then about his nature as a sannyasi, he said these beautiful words in Matthew chapter 8. Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. So again, the idea of the sannyasi, which Swamiji memorializes in his Song of the Sannyasin. The grass thy bed, the sky thy roof, the grass thy bed, and food what chance might bring. judge not. So the same idea as taught by Christ. And then Christ says in the Sermon on the Mount, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Who of you, by worrying anything, can add a single hour to his life? And why do you worry about clothes? Consider how the lilies of the field grow. They labor not or spin. Yet I tell you that even Solomon, King Solomon, in all his glory, was not adorned like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? So again, that idea of complete surrender to God, that God will give you that which you need. So again, the ideal of the sannyasi, and also the ideal for any of those, sannyasi or householder, who seek to practice perfect surrender to God. So it also Jesus taught through parables, as the great teachers have always done. He taught simply, and yet he taught profound truths through parables, through illustrations that would drive the truths into the hearts of his listeners, as Sriramakrishna did. Sriramakrishna's wonderful way of teaching the highest truths through simple, ordinary, daily illustrations taken from the life of people's everyday life. And so that's one of the hallmarks of the great world teachers. Other teachers come and speak in philosophical terms, speak in intellectual terms, even if they're great spiritual people. But the great teachers, they make the greatest truths accessible to one and all, and that is what Jesus did. Then Sri Ramakrishna used to say that Paramahamsas, souls of the highest order of realization, that they surround themselves with children because of the innocence and the spontaneity of children, so that the Paramahamsa is inspired by the example of children to, with that spontaneity and that carefree attitude of children. So Jesus said, before begins with the narration, Jesus called a little child unto him, and set him in the midst of them, and said, verily I say unto you, except ye be converted. That doesn't mean converted in the modern sense of converted to Christianity. It means metanoia, the change of mind, the change of your nature, transformed. So except ye be transformed and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name, receiveth me. So he doesn't say, unless you become one of these little children who's a immature sinner. He said, no, unless you become like one of these little children in their innocence and in their purity, then you can't enter into the kingdom of heaven. And one who receives one such as this receives me. And so then we come to some of the statements of Jesus which are used to make him the exclusive teacher of religion. For instance, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so as Swami Vivekananda indicated, yes, that's true. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Certainly every incarnation is the way, the truth, and the life. Because, again, it's a matter of interpretation. You can read the Gita, as some Vaishnavas do, and make it into a narrow, parochial, fanatical text where Sri Krishna is always talking about me, Sri Krishna, not Rama, not Shiva, not Ganesha, not any of those other guys, only me, Krishna. That demeans the nature of Krishna himself. That the mainstream way of seeing Krishna's statements in the Gita is, and has been by the great commentators, is that Sri Krishna was speaking from his divine nature. And so when Christ says things like this, he's speaking from the standpoint of, I, the Son of God, that I, as God, as one with God, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And as the incarnation also, I am the way, because that's the very purpose of the incarnation, is to come and to show the way. And if one takes refuge in the incarnation, one finds that the incarnation can carry us to liberation as well. So yes, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But then the rest is quoted that no one comes to the Father except by me. Swami Vivekananda said, yes, even that is true, because it's only through seeing God manifested that we understand what God is. And so it's through the great teacher that we find our way to God. And so again, there are ways of interpreting these things, and clear ways, not by stretching the text as if it were made of elastic or something, but straightforward ways of interpreting the text, which doesn't land us in the narrow sort of religion that came out of his teaching. And then the beautiful statement of Jesus, the kingdom of God is within you. The whole passage says, and when Jesus was demanded by the Pharisees when the kingdom of God should come, that is, when the Pharisees asked him, when is this kingdom that you're teaching, the kingdom of God, when is it going to come? Jesus said, the kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, lo here or lo there. For behold, the kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God is within you. So that wonderful mystical teaching that the kingdom of God is here. It's not lo here or lo there. It's not within space, not within time even, but it's here. And then another statement that's used to sort of make Jesus exclusive is his statement, which comes within the Sermon on the Mount. Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits ye shall know them. So shortening all of that, beware of false prophets, for by their fruits ye shall know them. But this text, if read by itself, it indicates that there are good prophets. He says that from a good tree, good fruit comes, and from a bad tree comes. So that's the same advice that's given when one seeks a guru, that don't seek a guru, don't seek anyone to be your guru, but look at the way what Sriramakrishna taught and what the tradition teaches is to look at the life of the guru and only take one as your guru whose life is pure, who understands the essence of the tradition and who has the best interests of the disciple at heart and nothing else. So Jesus' own statement indicates that there are good prophets. He doesn't say, beware of false prophets because all other prophets are false. I'm the only good prophet. No, he doesn't say that. So then if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, the wonderful universal teachings contained in the Sermon on the Mount, teachings which appeal to anyone of any spiritual tradition, which is why Swami Atmarupananda took that as the text for his book, Sermon on the Mount According to Vedanta. Once in San Diego, I was part of an interreligious meeting back in the end of the 1980s. It was a big meeting with hundreds of people present, the public invited, in Balboa Park. And each of us, there were many people, many Christians, many Jewish rabbis, and myself for Hinduism, and Buddhists of different types, etc. All were asked to do something, to chant something, sing something, read something, say something, but something short, or offer a prayer or something. And so one Christian minister, he got up and said he was going to read from the Beatitudes, the part of the Sermon on the Mount where Christ says, blessed are the righteous, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, etc. So he read the Beatitudes one by one in a very dramatic voice. The striking thing was, he came to blessed are the pure in spirit. So he's saying, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall realize God. And blessed are the righteous. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. That he read as if he was embarrassed by it. He almost read it under his breath till he could get to the more dramatic parts. But as Swami Vivekananda said, if all the teachings of religion and all of the prophets were to disappear from the world, and that one statement of Jesus were to remain, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, then religion would survive. Because that is the central teaching of religion. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. That's the essence of religion. So he said, if everything else disappears, and that remains. But again, you see how the teachings of Jesus can so easily be, and that can happen to Hindu teachers as well, but how the teachings of Jesus can be perverted. And then the wonderful teaching that pervades the gospel, the teaching of love. Jesus' emphasis on love, and the emphasis on love and acceptance of all, love for the poor, love for the downtrodden, that pervades the Gospels, that wonderful spirit. Jesus was the first great teacher who taught that love for human beings is not contrary to spiritual love. Other religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, had taught compassion. But love was seen as tied to attachment. But it was Jesus who taught that no, loving with a pure heart other human beings is the same love as love for God. Love for the poor, love for the downtrodden. Whatever you have done for these, you have done for me. That is, when have you visited me in prison, fed me, clothed me, etc. Whatever you do for anyone, you are doing for me in service. So the story of the woman at the well, whom Jesus forgives, the story of the prodigal son, the good Samaritan, all of these stories of the acceptance of people for who they are, not because of where they are born or who they are born from. So Jesus said in Matthew, and here he's quoting the Jewish Bible, he's asked, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? And Jesus said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And second is like unto it, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the laws and the prophets. Hang all the law and the prophets. On these two commandments, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind, and thou shalt love the neighbor as thyself. These are the two great commandments, he said. And then in the epistles of St. John, in the Bible, after the Gospels, there are the Acts of the Apostles, and then there are the letters, most of them letters of St. Paul, but there are also letters of Peter and letters of John. And so John, in 1 John, he says, But anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love. And then later he says, We know how much God loves us, and we have put our trust in his love. God is love, and all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. So that statement, God is love, one of my teachers in India, a Hindu Swami, of course, he said that that's the fifth Mahavakya, the four Mahavakyas, the great sayings of the Upanishads. Tattvamasi, thou art that. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Ayam Atma Brahma, this very self is Brahman. And Prajnanam Brahma, consciousness is Brahman. Each of the four Mahavakyas, great sayings, is called a Mahavakya because it's said to express the essence of the Upanishadic wisdom. It points to something within our experience and says that which you experience, that is God, or that is the self, that is Brahman. Know that, and you've known the truth. Know who you are, and you've known the truth. Know what consciousness is, and you've known the truth. Know what this self is, and you've known the truth. So this Swami told me that God is love. That's the fifth Mahavakya because it points to something that we know and says that if we know it in itself, that is God. And that's what St. John is saying here. So let me just say a couple more things and then I'll conclude. Time is up. But the emphasis on miracles in Christianity, that from a Hindu standpoint is misplaced. It happens in India as well. It happens just as much in India. But from the larger tradition of Hinduism, that's a misplaced interest. Sriramakrishna always discouraged that interest in miracles. Jesus himself discouraged it. When he healed people, he often says in the gospel, he says, go and don't tell anyone what has happened. But of course, immediately the people went out and told what miracles had happened. And so you find in Christianity this emphasis on miracles. I used to see this bumper sticker in California, obviously a Christian bumper sticker. The next time you feel perfect, try to walk on water. Meaning that nobody but God is perfect. You're just a sinner, and only Jesus could walk on water because he was God. No, that's not true. That's a psychic power that even an ordinary person, if they work at it hard enough, they can gain. You can have psychic powers like Jesus expressed or other great saints have expressed also or shown, without being a saint. That's not a proof of anything. It's not a proof of saintliness. In fact, it's a bar to saintliness. It's said that only a realized soul can use such powers without becoming bound by them. And so the very emphasis on those things itself has been a weakness. It lends itself to mystery mongering also. And it also is behind the idea of who is a saint. To become canonized as a saint in the Catholic Church, a person has to have passed away, and then people who pray to that saint have to have miracles worked, because the working of miracles is a sign that that person has found favor with God. No, it's not at all. Miracles, what we consider miracles, those are things that happen following higher laws than the laws of physics. But they're following laws, natural laws of the way that the universe is built. But they're the laws of physics, and then they're the laws of metaphysics as well. And so what we call miracles are things that happen from a higher level of principle. And so it's not a sign of sainthood necessarily. And lastly, let me mention the idea of the resurrection. That was not believed by all Christians in the beginning. And Mark, the Gospel of Mark doesn't even mention the resurrection. So this idea that Jesus was bodily lifted into heaven. There have been such beliefs in the Tibetan tradition. There have been such beliefs in Hinduism of great saints who merged into murtis, into images and so forth. It may or may not be true, but that's beside the point. But the Christian idea is that God's physical body, remaining physical, went into heaven, and God still sits in heaven with his physical body. And that we, at the time of our salvation, we will have physical bodies. As Swami Vivekananda said, that that's an insult to the great man Jesus, to think that he would still be wearing the filthy body around. That idea that this body is somehow to be preserved, this idea that we are this body, that's the whole problem. That's the whole problem. But that came about because in Judaism, there was not at that time an idea of the soul. Later, the idea of soul came into Judaism, but at that time, you were the body, as Jewish rabbis themselves have told me, that you were the body. From dust you have come, and to dust you shall return. And so if the body is not saved, then there's no salvation. And so Jesus took his human body into heaven to mean that he had lifted human nature up into heaven. But to do that, according to the belief of the time, he had to take his physical body. And even now I've seen books by theologians arguing that personality is so tied to physicality that that's the reason why there must be resurrection of the body, because the personality and the physical body are tied together. You can't have immortality of the personality without the physical body. But that's a ridiculous and very extremely primitive and low idea, unworthy of Jesus and unworthy of the great saints of Christianity who came later. So now let me just conclude by closing with these beautiful words of Jesus, his promise to humanity, similar to the promises of other great teachers, where he says in Matthew, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest in your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So the wonderful promise of Jesus, as the great teachers have given, that come, learn from me. I'm humble in spirit, meek and humble in spirit. Learn from me. My yoke is take my yoke upon you. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So take my yoke upon you and follow me. So like Sri Krishna's promise in verse 66 of the 18th chapter of the Gita, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. Aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. That giving up everything else, take refuge in me, O Arjuna, because I will save you from all evil. Don't fear not, don't worry. I will save you from evil. So giving up everything else, take refuge in me. I will liberate you. So that's the message of the great teacher. That's the message of the great child of light known as Jesus. So I'll stop here. Let me give announcements, and I'll take one or two questions if there are any. We have one here in the audience, which I'll take first, and then one there. So probably won't take time for more than that if people start getting inspired to ask more questions, because it's already late. So first, for announcements. On Tuesday, we will begin the study of the Mandukya Upanishad. I had been announcing the Mundaka Upanishad, but I realized that in December we will only have 2 Upanishad classes and then a long break. So I didn't want to start the Mundaka and then just get started and then have a long break. So the Mandukya I can do in 2 classes. So I'll start it this Tuesday. On Thursday we'll have the Gospel of Sriramakrishna. So this month we will have 2 Upanishad classes and 3 gospel classes, because we've already had 1. We'll have 2 more gospel classes, and then we'll go on a break. And again, this is the last Sunday service. We will have a Christmas Eve service on the 24th at 7 o'clock with a reading from the nativity scenes, singing of Christmas carols, and a very short talk on the meaning of Christmas, ending with Arati, the waving of the lights. And then on January 1st, we will have our Kalpataru Day celebration, celebrating the day of Sri Ramakrishna's self-manifestation. It's like the transfiguration in the Christian tradition. And also we will celebrate on the 1st of January the birth anniversary of the Holy Mother, Sri Sarada Devi. So we'll have a puja for the Holy Mother and a short reading on the Kalpataru Day. And so we invite you all to come for that. So now let me ask Deepak for his question, and then the one from the internet. And for the people who are watching online, I'll repeat his question.
Two questions. Number one is Buddhism parochial and missionary?
Okay, let me answer that first, and then we'll get to the second question. So is Buddhism parochial and missionary in spirit like Christianity and Islam? It can be, and it is missionary in spirit, because the Buddha himself, Buddha was the first teacher to make a missionary religion. because he himself sent his teachers out and said to go out to the four corners and spread this message of the saving Dharma. So he himself was the first, as far as we know in history, first we know of, to send out missionaries to the world to teach them the truths that he had discovered. But the difference in Buddhism from Christianity and Islam is that they didn't go out with armies. They didn't go out to colonize. They didn't go out to forcibly convert people. The Buddhist missionaries went out and taught to those who would listen. And they were persistent, some of them. It took hundreds of years before Buddhism took root in China. But they went out to remote places like Tibet of that time. Even now, Tibet is very remote and difficult to access, except by plane. But at that time, it was extraordinarily difficult to get to Tibet. And yet they went to Tibet, missionary after missionary, presenting the Buddhist teachings. But they didn't try to change the culture, and they didn't try to conquer the people or force the people to convert. They converted people through ideas, through an appeal to the ideas. And wherever Buddhism went, the local culture remained pretty much intact, which is why you see great differences between Tibetan Buddhism and Sri Lankan Buddhism and Cambodian Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism and Japanese Buddhism. Everywhere the culture remained the local culture, and the teachings were taught within the context of that culture. So that's the great difference between Buddhism and the other two missionary religions, Christianity and Islam, which forced conversion many times, and which were military and which tried to change the very culture of the people they took over. So the second question.
Hinduism and Judaism have hundreds of thousands of years before they came, whereas Christianity grew to 2100 years, and Islamism maybe 1400 years. So the modern religions are more parochial, more missional, but the old traditional ones were not.
Yes, so the question, actually it's a statement asking for commentary, is that the old religions, Hinduism and Judaism, they're very old. They come from prehistory into history, and there's the history of them, but they have roots even before history. Before recorded history. And so the old religions tend to be not parochial, not sectarian, not missionizing, not trying to convert other people. Whereas the Christianity is 2,000 years old, Islam maybe 1,400 years old, Buddhism 2,500 years old. And so you see with them more that missionary spirit, and also in the case of Christianity and Islam, that exclusive spirit, that we have the exclusive hold on truth and everyone should follow us. So we are the only true religion. And so just a comment on the fact that older religions, and that's true wider than Hinduism and Judaism, if you find like Zoroastrianism also, which came from the same soil as Hinduism and Jainism. And then you look at the indigenous traditions, the Native Americans, the indigenous African traditions, the South American traditions, etc., indigenous traditions. You find there also that those were not as parochial as the later religions came. But I think the parochialism comes not specifically from the fact that they were newer, but from the fact that there was this idea in the case of Christianity and Islam, that they came with this, the Jewish idea that our God is the true God. Now that in a Jewish context, that's understandable. And Judaism has, Jewish people tend to be liberal, culturally and otherwise. But that came out of the being a tribal religion in conflict with other tribes, the effort to survive and so forth, that came up with this idea that our God is the true God. But when that, as I said in the talk, when that went into missionary religions, our God is the true God, and everybody has to believe, then it becomes a very deadly idea, a very damaging and destructive idea. That wasn't necessary in Christianity. It wasn't necessary in Islam either. But since we're talking about Christianity, I'll stick with that for the ease of discussion. Christ himself told people to go out and to spread his message, but he didn't go out and say force it on people. If they don't accept my message, then you can force it on them. No, he didn't say that at all. And he didn't say that. He said that beware of false prophets, or you should know them by their fruit. So if the fruits of other prophets are good, then they're not false prophets, according to Jesus' own words. So that was not at all necessary that Christ's message be associated with that sort of destructive missionizing. It's still destructive. And so I think that comes more from having taken, and again in Buddhism, though they were missionary, they did have the idea, and still many Buddhists have the idea that Buddhism is the true religion. So they have that idea, but that comes out of Hinduism, which had the opposite idea, because the Buddhists define themselves as we're not like them. As Swami Vivekananda said, it was with Buddhism that the idea of different religions came into India. Before that, the Vedic idea was that there's just religion, and people do it in different ways. There's the Vedic way of doing it, the non-Vedic way of doing it, etc. And within the Vedic way, there are different ways of doing it. But with Buddhism, they said, we're not like you, we're separating out. And so in Buddhism, you see that even to this day, Buddhism partially defines the tradition, its tradition by what they are against and what they're not like. Swamiji said that's the great danger in reform-minded traditions, that they become bound by what they're resisting. So in Buddhism's case, it's that they define themselves outside and are still defining themselves outside. And in Christianity and Islam, it's the case that they also are defining themselves eventually as outside when they define themselves as non-Jewish. But then they took that idea that our God is the true God, and the idea that Jesus wants us to missionize, and so we have to force that God down other people's throats. So, yes. Yes, a good question. What is the difference between love and compassion? Obviously, the two are connected. There's a deep connection between the two. But the difference is that compassion is empathy, feeling the sufferings of others as one's own, and feeling the joys of others as one's own. And so feeling a sense of empathy, which is a very good thing, a very great thing. But that's what Buddhism emphasized. They didn't emphasize love. So love is seen as the experience of unity. Love as an aspiration is the aspiration for unity, whether it's with another person or with God. Love fulfilled is the experience of unity. And so love is a much deeper sense of unity than compassion is. In compassion, there's a sympathy based on feeling that your joys and sorrows are just as important as mine, but it doesn't go to the point of the attempt to experience unity. And so with questions like this, we can understand it best if we look to our own experience. And when I feel compassion for someone, or when I feel deep love for someone, I myself will know the difference between the two. So let me stop here, because we've gone way over time. You asked me later, because we're already half an hour over time. I'm sorry. We can ask later, because it's not fair to everyone. We're already 25 minutes over time, and we still have arati. So let me give a closing chant. Om madhuvatartayate madhuksharanti sindhavaha madhvirna santoshadhihi madhunaktamuto shasi madhumatparthivagum rajaha madhudyaurastu nafpita Madhumando vanaspatir madhumagum mastu suryaha madhvirgavo bhavantunaha. Om Madhu, Om Madhu, Om Madhu. For us who seek the truth, and for all beings, may the winds blow sweetly, may the rivers flow sweetly, may the herbs yield us sweetness. Sweet be the night and the break of day, sweet be the very dust of the earth. May the heavens pour down sweetness upon us. May the trees, lords of the forest, bear us sweetness. May the sun shed its sweetness upon us. May all the directions pour forth sweetness. Om, sweetness, sweetness, sweetness.